There is a house in the Hamptons that is so big, it's honestly overwhelming. It's got over 110,000 square feet, 29 bedrooms, 39 bathrooms, a garage that can literally fit 100 cars. And as crazy as this house is, a lot of you guys watching are probably like me. You've never heard of this house before, and there's a good reason why. The owner, billionaire Ira Rennert, isn't the type who shows up on red carpets or puts his name on arenas. He does his very best to fly completely under the radar, but with a home like the one that he's got in New York, it's kind of hard to stay out of the spotlight. This thing is such a symbol of extreme wealth that a book was written about it titled The House That Ate the Hamptons. The property itself is crazy. It's basically a compound, but this story isn't just about an offensively large and expensive house. There's so much more to this that we need to dig into. The owner has been through a slew of drama over the past couple of decades. Just one example was when he was ordered to pay a $118 million fine in 2015 after a lawsuit alleged that he forced one of his companies into bankruptcy to help pay for this Hamptons palace. And at the same time of all that happening, his company Doe Run was being accused of lead poisoning after entire communities in Peru were allegedly sickened by his operations that were connected to his company. Today, let's talk about the story behind one of the largest, one of the most expensive, and one of the most mysterious mega mansions in the world. Ira Rennert made his fortune through Renco Group. He was born in Brooklyn in the 1930s. He wasn't handed down a fortune either. He started with next to nothing and slowly worked his way up to a multi-billion-dollar net worth. His company, Renco Group, isn't your typical flashy big business like Apple or Amazon. It's more of a holding company, like this giant umbrella for messy old school industries. I guess to sum it up really simply, Renco's biggest moneymaker and how they generate cash flow is by taking over operationally intensive companies across mining, metals, manufacturing, automotive, and transportation. Kind of complicated, but when you build a successful business like this, you need to put that money somewhere, and most successful people, they'll buy a couple houses, they might buy a couple yachts, they might buy a private plane, maybe they'll buy a sports team, but what Rennert did is he set his sights on a prime piece of real estate in New York. This started in the mid-1990s when he scooped up his first piece of land in Sagaponack, a quiet village in the Hamptons. The specific location he selected was interesting. The Hamptons is kind of a cluster of villages and towns on the far east end of Long Island. Each area has its own vibe. Southampton tends to be old money. East Hampton is a little more artsy. Montauk used to be a fishing town, but now it's more trendy. And then there's Sagaponack, where Rennert landed. It was farmland at the time, not exactly the type of territory that you'd expect a billionaire to want to settle in. The fact that it was farmland, though, is exactly what drew him in. This area wasn't overrun yet. Land was available, so he took that as a signal to start buying up parcel after parcel, land right on the water, and by the time he was done, he controlled over 60 acres of contiguous land in one of the most expensive zip codes in America. After Rennert had put together one of the biggest plots of residential land imaginable, he got to work dreaming up the craziest and most extravagant house the area would have ever seen. Construction started around 1995. It was a complex of multiple structures, extensive grounds, tons and tons of concrete. Work trucks came and left around the clock. And after 8 years of construction, this residence, which was known as Fairfield, was finally nearing completion. The main home alone was 64,000 square feet. Total living space on the property, when including the guest houses and staff quarters, topped out at over 110,000 square feet. Rennert's place had 29 bedrooms, 39 bathrooms, a dining room that was over 90 feet long. It had a 100-car garage, bowling alleys, a couple of swimming pools, a 164-seat movie theater. It even had its own power plant to keep everything running. And he never said for sure how much it cost, but the estimated cost of construction here was over $100 million, and that's $100 million in 1995 money. Neighbors called the project obscene. They said that it destroyed the rural character of Sagaponack. They argued that it might even somehow be violating zoning codes. When it was finished, Helicopters were often seen coming and going from the home, something that you also don't see in a residential neighborhood all that much, even in the Hamptons. Like I said at the start of the video, this story was so big at the time that a book was even written about it called The House That Ate the Hamptons. And what's funny is that the owner, Rennert, he stayed very quiet during these early stages of construction and even as the house finished up, which made everyone even more nervous and more anxious just because no one fully understood what was happening here. Eventually, after years of silence, Rennert and his son came out to the press and shared that what he built was simply a home where he would spend his old age, and he even jokingly said that he's buying old age and loneliness insurance with this mansion. With 29 bedrooms, he could hopefully find plenty of company. Rennert squashed all of the speculation in this single interview. He confirmed that he didn't have any plans to use the house as like a religious retreat or resort or anything like that. He never even actually planned to sell it, he said. This was going to be his forever home. While Rennert's mansion was dominating headlines in the Hamptons, he was also dominating headlines for a very different reason about 4,000 miles away. The heart of one of Rennert's business operations at the time was this area called La Oroya, Peru, a high-altitude mining town in the Andes. What happened was Renco Group acquired a lead smelter out there. This smelter had been in business since around 1920. Their business was lead, and it didn't take long before Rennert and his company were wrapped up in a slew of drama related to this lead company that they just acquired. While he was building his compound in the Hamptons, reports began to surface that children in La Oroya had alarmingly high levels of lead in their blood. We're talking levels so high that doctors warned of permanent brain damage, learning disabilities, stunted growth, and after local soil and water were tested, it was determined that pretty much the entire town was contaminated. Environmental groups, of course, started to step in. Lawsuits began. There were allegations that Renco had failed to meet commitments to clean up emissions like they were supposed to. The concern was that the smelter spewed heavy metals into the air due to some corners that were cut to maintain profitability in the business. This whole thing dragged on for a decade, maybe more. By 2006, Time magazine actually named La Oroya one of the most polluted places in the world. In that piece, it was reported that even after active emissions from the smelter are reduced, lead will remain in La Oroya's soil for centuries. As you would expect, the contrast in what was happening here sparked a lot of controversy. Ira Rennert was building one of the most luxurious personal retreats the world had ever seen, while his business was simultaneously facing allegations of poisoned children. And I should mention that it didn't help that Rennert was already a bit of a controversial figure due to some of his business dealings all the way back to a pretty young age. He was said to emerge out of Brooklyn as one of Wall Street's most renowned bad boys. He was a self-employed stockbroker when the National Association of Securities yanked his certification in 1964. They claimed that he was operating with insufficient capital, which is when he jumped then into private equity, issuing millions in junk bonds to finance the purchase of mining and industrial operations. Rennert earned his first $500 million this way in the 1990s, and it was this money that was used to finance the industrial empire that he would later call Renco Group. According to the New York Times, federal regulators and environmentalists have been pursuing Mr. Rennert for a while, filing at least a dozen lawsuits, calling his smokestack business some of the country's worst polluters. And these issues weren't just happening overseas. In 2001, tests revealed that children who were living near the smelter owned by his company in Missouri had enough lead in their blood to cause brain damage. That lawsuit was later settled for, I believe, $320 million. Shifting gears a little bit back to real estate, since this is a real estate channel after all, let's talk about some other people over the years who have either pushed the limit or just flat out ignored the limits when building their house. The home known as the Idle Hour House in Oakdale, commissioned by William Vanderbilt, stands out for sure. This one began in the 1880s. It was rebuilt after a fire in 1890. 1999. It featured 110 rooms with about 70,000 square feet. This home eventually became part of the college campus. Then we've got Oheka Castle in Huntington, built for financier Otto Kahn in 1910. This one was very close in size to Rennert's house, clocking in at 109,000 square feet and 127 rooms. The property is now run as a hotel and an event venue. Leaving Long Island, we've got George Vanderbilt's Biltmore Mansion in Asheville. This is considered the largest privately owned house in the United States, featuring 178,000 square feet, around 250 rooms, and it's still owned by the Vanderbilt's descendants to this day. Over on the West Coast, we've got the Hearst Castle, conceived by William Randolph Hearst. This home started construction in 1919. It's got about 90,000 square feet of living space with 42 bedrooms and 61 bathrooms. It now functions as a ticketed museum. I'm starting to notice a trend here. It seems like most of these houses that were built as houses later turned into public spaces at some point in time. We've got the Meadowbrook Hall outside of Detroit. This home was built in the 20s by the heiress to the Dodge automaker fortune. Her name was Matilda Wilson, and she built this 88,000 square foot home with her second husband. It's now a historic landmark. The point is, there are some other houses scattered around that reach that 100,000 square foot mark, but they're few and far between. Even the most expensive listing in the country right now is this house in Aspen. It just hit the market recently. They're asking $300 million for the property. It was built in 1994. It's sitting on 74 acres, but even at this price, it's only 27,000 square feet of space with 18 bedrooms and 24 bathrooms. So yeah, it's just not all that common for people to build a 100,000 square foot house. In fact, it's very unusual. And as we just learned, when people do, oftentimes they later turn into museums or whatever. Fast forward to December 2024, and Ira Rennert hits the headlines yet again. He's got this same lawsuit around the Peruvian mine that he's been fighting since 2007. It goes back to claiming that his company failed to reduce lead emissions in the mine to meet regulations as a part of an agreement between the company and the Peruvian government. A lawyer who's been working on the case for the last 17 years told the New York Post that if Rennert and his company are found guilty, they could be on the hook for as much as $1 billion in fines. The last thing that Rennert wants at this point in his life is a $1 billion lawsuit, I'm sure, but he does have a $4 billion net worth, and he is 90 years old, so I don't know. You could do the math. I'll see you guys next week.